Give me 10 minutes and I'm going to go see it again. Oh, you want an actual review. All right, let me put this out. A couple of things before we jump into the review proper. First of all, it will be a half and half. It'll be spoiler free, and then I'll cut it, and then I'll go into the spoiler part of the review. So you will have ample warning for that. Yes. So if you want a review, but you don't want the plot spoilers, just watch up until I warn you. Yeah? First of all, let's talk my Mad Max credentials, shall we? So you know where I'm coming from, because I don't want to review this just as an action film, right? I want to review it as a Mad Max film. That was me trying to very subtly put my phone on vibrate and set it aside so it doesn't interrupt us. I think I pulled it off, and you never knew what I was doing. I, of course, am a big Mad Max fan. You can see the poster back there, which, by the way, harder to get than you would have imagined. Maybe it's easier now, but years ago when I got it, very difficult, very expensive. Went through the time and effort to get it because I'm a fan. I also have this. This is the last of the V8 Interceptors. This is the car from Road Warrior. And I don't know how good the detail's going to be here, but this one, is in addition to being really heavy metal, is actually film specific. If you look there, you can see there's the self-detonation device that he has wired up, and next to it is this brown knife sheath, both of which feature into the film. I mean, the inside, it's film accurate. It's very nifty. It's very heavy. It took me a while to find exactly the model I wanted, because you can find several from the first film and from Road Warrior, but this is the car, Jack. This is the coolest film car ever. Mad Max was the first DVD I ever bought. Road Warrior was the first Blu-ray I ever bought. I discovered Mad Max in high school. So, late 90s, early 2000, right? And I got sucked in. Now, what's really funny, I consider myself to be a very huge Mad Max fan. However, I really only like about the last 10 minutes of the first movie. I love the second film, Road Warrior. It is the greatest action film ever made. And I'm okay with the first half of the third movie. Most of the first movie and the last half of the third movie, yeah. And yet I still consider myself a huge Mad Max fan. So, yeah. So that said, I've been looking forward to this for a long, long time. Also, I've got buried somewhere in my parents' attic Road Warrior action figures and a print of Max and his dog from Road Warrior somewhere. You've seen the image. If you Google Road Warrior, you'll see the image of Max walking down the street with his dog. Big fan. So that's where I'm coming from. And let's just say right off the bat, first off, oh, yeah, that is something else we have to address too. I'm sorry. For some reason, the internet is all abuzz about this reboot or remake that Mad Max Fury Road is. It's neither. It's a sequel. It's supposed to be the fourth film in the Mad Max franchise. George Miller's been calling it a sequel the whole time. It's written and directed by the guy who's done all of them, George Miller. They did replace the main character because it's 30 years later. But it's still a sequel. It's not a remake because the story is wholly original and different from the previous 3 Mad Max stories. It's not a reboot because it does not in any way ignore previous continuity. Admittedly, this movie doesn't make reference to previous continuity, but it doesn't contradict it. And it's not a new creative team making it. It's the same creative team continuing the story. This is supposed to be Mad Max 4, and for the first sentence of this review, let's go ahead and say it is. It fully deserves its place as Mad Max 4. It is... I'm having a hard time deciding whether or not it's better than Road Warrior. I want to stick with Road Warrior, but I don't know if that's just because of nostalgic purposes. So either way, they're very close in terms of quality. It's very nice. Somebody very clearly told George Miller he could do whatever he wanted, and he did. This movie is insane. It is everything you've ever loved about George Miller cranked up to 11. The characters are more outrageous, the vehicles, the chase scenes. Following the production of this film, there were two quotes from the director that I really liked, that really made me look forward to it. One was that the film was meant to feel like a 2-hour chase sequence. Even though it's not technically, he wanted the audience to feel like it was a 2-hour chase sequence. I would say mission accomplished. Because even the downtimes of the film are still in a chase sequence. And by downtimes, I just mean the less action-packed, adrenaline-fueled moments, not lesser moments. Another thing that he said was he really wanted to make the film so that it could be understood in Japan without subtitles. Japan just being a random country that he picked. The idea being that it's an action movie, the dialogue can enhance the experience, but shouldn't be necessary to understand exposition. That was also accomplished, because I kept that in mind as I watched it, and I really feel like you could understand this entire movie without understanding a word of dialogue, which is good, because I defy anybody to go and see this movie in theaters and understand half the characters' names, because of all the noise and the Australian accents and the fact that the names are all crazy go nuts. I had to look a few of them up afterwards. It took a while for me to learn them all. It's a great action film. I mean, it is pure action. All right, there's not a romantic comedy angle to it. It's just action, action, action. So if you're a fan of the Mad Max series, or you just really want to go see an action film where cars go kaboom a lot and explosions and people fighting, I do recommend it. It's surprisingly light on gore. There were a few opportunities to be pretty gory, and it wasn't. A lot of the extreme violence happens just off camera. About as violent as it gets is you see a couple bodies fall underneath the wheels of 18-wheelers and whatnot, but you don't see them like explode, and there's not blood all over the place. People do get beat up a lot, and there's a lot of bruising and little bits of blood leaking and whatever, but it's very light on gore. There's also no nudity, well, almost no nudity. Very light on nudity, and it's not titillating nudity, what there is. In fact, I'd forgotten about it until just this moment. So it is heavy action. It is violent. I mean, it is angry people crashing vehicles into each other. If this sounds like your kind of thing, I absolutely recommend it. It's at 99 on Rotten Tomatoes, which is, by no means a guaranteed mark of quality, but it's pretty impressive. Road Warrior is at 98. Which I think is pretty impressive. Beyond Thunderdome was 80, just to give you a comparison. So that's a spoiler freeze it's going to get. We're going into spoiler territory now, because we're going to address Tom Hardy's performance and other factors. So that's it for the spoiler free. Go away. Shoo. Let's start with something easier. The main villain of the piece is Immortan Joe. The film opens with Furiosa, played by Charlize Theron, stealing his brides, who he uses for breeding purposes, and escaping. They end up running into Max, and Max helps them escape Immortan Joe. Although, being Max, he doesn't do it out of the kindness of his heart. He does it because he's backed into a corner and doesn't have a choice but to help them if he wants to live. And then at the end, he helps them a little bit out of the kindness of his heart before. We'll get to the ending in a minute. So Immortan Joe was actually played by not Byron Kennedy. His name's complicated. He played the Toe Cutter, the main villain of the first movie, because George Miller does like to reuse actors. So Toe Cutter plays the main villain in this, and he does a good job. as being just this ridiculous, over-the-top, what you'd expect from a Mad Max villain. This is back to the Lord Humongous days, not the Tina Turner days. This is wacky, over-the-top villainy. The movie's beautifully made. I mean, it takes advantage of CG a lot more than I would have liked. Because, again, all I'm doing is comparing this thing to Road Warrior, which is probably not fair to the movie. But in Road Warrior, there was no CG. It was all practical effects, which put a lot of stuntmen at risk. And, in fact, I know there's one shot in the movie where a stunt comes off wrong. It looks amazing, but the stunt actor broke both his legs doing it. So, being a stuntman on a Mad Max film, dangerous work. So there is a little bit more CG, but it's still solid. Tom Hardy as Mad Max. Max is a hard role to pull off because Max doesn't talk much. He's an innerly tormented character who I think typically has less than 20 lines of dialogue in a film, not counting the first one because it's before he became tormented. He doesn't talk much, so almost all of your acting has to be physical, which is very hard to pull off. And Tom Hardy did a good job. It wasn't the Max I was expecting, and it's probably unfair of me to spend the entire movie comparing him to Mel Gibson's version of Mad Max. But that's what I did. I'm trying not to, and I can't avoid it. Tom Hardy's Max lacked a certain amount of stoicism. He was a lot more animated, almost comically so in places. There were scenes where you could, during some of the action sequences, when he was strapped to a car, you could see him muttering to himself, which is not something I would imagine Max to do. You know, Max doesn't waste words like that. But it's a new interpretation of the character. And I will say this, it worked out okay. You know, it was a little bit different than I was expecting, but it still worked well. Because from a writing standpoint, they didn't change the character. He was still distrustful. He didn't want to get involved in stuff. All he wanted to do was get his car and go on his way. In the end, I was so worried that they would have some plot with him and Furiosa falling in love. That did not happen. Good. Max still loves his wife if he loves anybody. And the ending, I was sweating it there because previously, 2 and 3, Mad Max 1 doesn't really follow the same formula as the Mad Max stories. It's kind of like a prequel or an origin story. Even though it's the first in the series, it's formatted differently. But in 2 and 3, both times he ends up helping out a group of people settle a new civilization that he's not a part of. In the second one, it's by choice. And the end of I have all sorts of issues with the end of the third one, but it's kind of implied that he would have gone with them, and he did not, and he couldn't because of circumstances. And this one, it went back to exactly how Max should be. Saves the day, helps everybody out, and then as everybody's celebrating, he just walks away into the wasteland again, because that's where he lives. The V8 Interceptor, the lovely car, is briefly in the movie again. Spoiler alert, it blows up in Road Warrior. It is destroyed. In Thunderdome, you open with Max, I think he's got camels, I'm pretty sure it is, camels pulling some of the remains of the Interceptor behind him. Like he's just dragging around the remains of the Interceptor with him, and it gets stolen, and he goes through a lot of trouble to get it back. And at the very opening of this one, it looks like he's got it back, and he's rebuilt it somewhat. It's nowhere near as cool as this. It is not in this shape. But it is the V8 Interceptor, briefly, and then it's taken from him again. And then when he sees it later in the movie, he just goes, "My car! Give me back my car!" which I'm okay with. Was it necessary dialogue? No, but Max's attachment to his car is something I can appreciate because I feel attachment to that car, and I'm heartbroken. I was heartbroken when it was blown up. I was heartbroken when it got destroyed in this movie. Oh, I warned you this was not a spoiler-free review. But there's no point to go into every detail. How it gets destroyed, you can see for yourself. But it's heartbreaking. Supposedly, Hardy has signed up to do 4 more Mad Max movies. I'm okay with that. He didn't play it exactly the same way as Mel Gibson, but you can't really, you shouldn't expect that. You shouldn't expect somebody to exactly duplicate somebody else's performance. That's not how acting works. So he did take his own take on it. And as a Mad Max historian of sorts, I can even justify the change in character. The first movie is mainly the tale of how he lost everything and became this hardened, burned-out shell of a man. And Road Warrior is that shell of a man at his height. It is at the very height of being an anti-hero. Right? The third one, and it's part of what I don't like about the third one, at the halfway mark, he encounters a tribe of children and instantly gets his humanity back. Right that second. All of a sudden, boom, he's got hope for the future. He's got plans. This is what we're going to do. I'm going to save everybody. Which is weird. It's weird because it's so sudden. We just watched this guy for a movie and a half be the burned out shell of an anti-hero, and then, boom, I'm a hero. However, he did save the children, and in that act of saving the children, arguably found some degree of redemption. He was not able to go with them, but arguably regained a little bit of humanity in the process of that film. As much as I may not like how that storyline went, that's what happened. So, the Max we see in the fourth one, in Fury Road, is a slightly more human Max, which might explain the muttering to himself, which might explain the more animatedness. He's not as dead inside. That argument can be made. One thing I really didn't like, because it was so weird, and I just wanted to stand up and explain to the audience in the theater, hey, for those of you new to this franchise, that's not normal. That's not how this franchise works. Max was tormented throughout the entire film by visions of children he failed to save. It was some interesting visuals. And there were moments where it kind of worked for the story, but I don't. It was weird. We know Max is tormented. He was tormented by the death of his wife and child that he was helpless to prevent. I don't know where these children came from. He saved children in 3. He saved them. Now, you could easily argue between the first and the second film, between the second and the third, and between the third and the fourth, he has had countless adventures. That's very easy to argue. That's not even a problem. So I guess in one of those adventures, he failed to save some children. It was odd in that it was set up and not resolved, which implies that it's now just a part of Max's character that he's racked with guilt for people he failed to save, which again could be argued to come about as the result of his redemption in Thunderdome. The fact that it's unresolved in the plot of this one tells us that it's now part of his character. And that, I don't know, it somehow downgrades his badassness when we can actually see his torment and when he reacts to it. When we see him flinching from his guilt, literally flinching away from his guilt and fears, it does undermine him a little bit as the badass anti-hero. I did not like that aspect of it. And see, it's little things like that. And there was a plot hole or two. And it's his slightly more animated performance, less stoic, less dead inside, more vital. These are the things that are keeping me from immediately just going, oh my god, that is so much better than Road Warrior. And I don't know if that's fair, and I don't know if it's because I'm putting Road Warrior up on a fun little pedestal because I've had it for so many years and I've spent so much time analyzing it and picking apart little bits of it and watching it and collecting things. I don't know how much of that is truly deserved, but Tom Hardy's performance wasn't exactly what I wanted, which is fair. And the Tormented Visions, I didn't like that. I can see maybe why you'd want to do it, and it did provide some neat visuals, but I don't want to see my hero flinching at his fears, not when my hero is Max. It's still, those two things aside, it's an amazing action, over-the-top, crazy action. The second I saw the gigantic armored 18-wheeler with a double-decker blower coming out of the hood, I knew we were in for something. Because it's an 18-wheeler with a blower, 5,000 horsepower. I also say Nicholas Hoult is in this. He played the Beast in the most recent X-Men movies. He was also on a TV show called Skins. I like the actor. He does a really good job in this. He plays a character called Nux, one of the bad guys who kind of who ends up joining the good guys. I liked his performance. I loved Immortan Joe just as this over the top. I have a soft spot for over the top, beard twisting, Van Dyke stroking, cartoonish evil. I do. I adore it. It is because it's fun to see actors in those roles just go all out. Don't worry about justifying your character's motivations. He's evil. Own it. Love it. Immortan Joe was great. The wives all did good performances. Charlize Theron did a great performance. I know there's a group of masculinists who have gone nuts on the internet because of this is now feminist propaganda. Okay, for the past 15 years I've known the plot of this movie was Max saves a bunch of pregnant women and helps them to find a new home. That has been on the internet for 15 years now. So there was going to be women in it. As for Charlize Theron being a strong female, yeah, in the post-apocalyptic environment, you're strong or you're dead. I'm sorry that your moronic views of femininity that requires them to stay in the kitchen and making you a sandwich didn't carry over into this fantasy world where everybody's struggling to survive. I'm a little disgusted if your fantasy exists in this world. Everybody's free to do what they want, regardless of gender. If I want to stay at home making sandwiches for my wife, that's cool. If she wants to stay at home making sandwiches for me, that's fine too. It's a choice. It's by no means should it be an expectation. But one of the arguments I saw against how this was feminist propaganda was they were ruining an American icon. Mad Max is an Australian icon. The movies were made in Australia by Australians and set in Australia. Just because you like something doesn't make it American. Just because something's popular in America doesn't make it American. Which, by the way, is something the video game company that was making the Mad Max game coming out in a couple months, something they found out to their surprise when they set their game in America and made their Mad Max an American and said it's still part of the story. And fans went, excuse me, that doesn't work. That's not who he is, and that's not where he is. How is it still part of the same story? And so they had to do some changes. Everybody just wants to own this. I like it, so it's part of my culture. No. This is part of Australian culture. You're welcome to like it, but it's part of Australian culture. Real quick, the movie did continue the tradition of Farscape actors being in the movie. Naranti is one of the old women they encounter near the end. Dargo was in the first one. Virginia Hayes was in the second one, which is going to tie us neatly back into our argument about... Oh, and Grunschlick is the toe cutter, who's also Morton Joe. Getting upset about there being a strong female in this Mad Max movie is also ridiculous, because the second movie, Road Warrior, had a character whose name was Warrior Woman. She kicked ass. That was her job and her name. Played by Virginia Hay. And then in the third film, Max repeatedly gets his ass beat by Tina Turner playing Auntie Entity. Strong women in the Mad Max film franchise is not new to this incarnation. So I don't get people getting all up in arms over the idea of there being strong women in this. If they weren't strong, they'd be dead. There are a couple of weak women in this. Very weak women. And they encounter several issues. Some of the wives are not so strong. One in particular is really weak. Because people are on a spectrum. Some men are strong, like Max. Some men are weak, like the people bitching about this. Some women are strong, like Furiosa. Some women are weak, like one of the brides. That's how people are. Anyway, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir because these morons cannot be the mainstream. I did want to get that out of my system, though. So that's it. That's a more. I'm very much looking forward to more Mad Maxes with Tom Hardy. It's just I'm gonna have to adjust a little bit to his performance. I'm hoping the whole tormented thing. You'll get the gesture if you see the movie. I'm hoping that I don't get it. I'm hoping that doesn't stick around as a defining characteristic of Max. Anyway, still overall A+ movie. One of the best action films that's come out in a long time, at the very least. And if it's not better than Road Warrior, it's right there with it. It's at least tied or just half a step below. So, and Road Warrior is the best action film ever made. You can shut up about Die Hard. I mean, it's good, but it's definitely 2 or 3 on the list. Wonderful action film. Great to see the franchise back. And it was wonderful to see the amount of trust that was placed in the director of this. Because you could really feel the George Miller-ness just oozing out of this film. Somebody really just gave this man money and said, do what you want. And what we got in response to that was something great. If you haven't seen it, you should. And if you haven't seen Road Warrior, you should. And then at that point, if you're curious, you can go back and watch the first one. Just don't expect it to be an action-packed fuel ride, because it's a bit of a snorer. It's an origin story. What do you want? Anyway, that's it. I feel like I've rambled on for half an hour, apparently, about this movie, which I think is long enough. Thank you for suffering with me. You're free to go back to your lives now.